Okay, well, I hope everybody had a good lunch. Great to meet a number of new people over lunch. Thanks for sharing your involvement and why you've come to the conference. This session is really about trying to grow Buddhism in the next 10 years in Australia and ask how two of the peak bodies, the ASA and the FABC, can serve their communities better and help. And it's been a pleasure working with Gawaine Powell Davies from the FABC, Venerable Mettaji from the Australian Sangha Association. It's been great working together to say, how can we collaborate? We both got limited resources. What is it we should be doing? We need to talk to our membership. We need to understand what Buddhism in general, and those who favor Buddhism but wouldn't put down in the census that they were Buddhist, what do they need from us? So from Gawaine and I today, this is a conversation starter. We kind of want to put to you some ideas, some visions we have about how that collaboration model would work, but we'll probably want to get through our slides fairly quickly that it becomes a conversation. And the conversation wouldn't finish today. It would be a case of, are there 3 or 4 things that we should look at very collaboratively after this conference and start to talk about putting those resources in place, getting funding if need be. So on that basis, I'm just going to put some ideas out from the ASA first, but they're meant to be working with the FABC, and I think the FABC sees us in the same way. The image at the front here was about collaboration between monastics and lay people. That's what the slide is trying to generate. Just a quick historical background about the ASA. You know, our constitution says we should represent the Sangha in Australia. We need to promote the Sangha's interest to federal and state government. We want to promote respect and harmony across all traditions, especially gender equity, gender equality. Protect the good reputation of the Sangha in Buddhism in all communities and preserve the legacy of the Sangha. To serve as a forum of matters of concern. So one that's going to come out next was helping monastics understand the visa application process. And I'm pleased to say that Home Affairs are going to be here shortly to talk to us and to promote Buddhism in Australia. So that was the historical background. But we got a lot of present challenges. And even though some of the wonderful monastics in the room, you know, have been here 40 years plus, Buddhism still remains, I'd say, fragmented in Australia. We've got pockets of excellence. We've done well in certain cities, but we're not completely across Australia. And some cultures may just say, well, we're going to center on a small number of suburbs around us. Even with that fragmentation, even with a lot of people doing, you know, massive work on monasteries, building new centers, being sent over from Bhutan to set up a new operation, a new center, considerable emphasis and effort is often having to go into maintaining one's own monastery or organization without being able to say, I have some capacity to come together at the ASA and work across traditions or come together with some new initiatives. So there's been, in our view, limited capacity to collaborate across traditions and cultures on a unified agenda, and that's why we wanted to come to you today. Additionally, the weight of government, the weight of laws has led to there being higher governance standards almost every year in recent times, which has led to more pressure, quite a bit of stress, and concerns for the committees of those organizations, the monasteries, all the volunteers that sort of try and help us on a daily basis. And we're getting to the point, we're not there yet, of a sort of common agreement on what the best working agenda to further support Buddhism in Australia should be for the next 10 years. We have done some great efforts in recent times. So we focused Gawaine, his team, the ASA, anybody that would work with us on getting good engagement with state and federal government in the last year. And you're going to see that tomorrow morning. I mean, to get parliamentary representation at the VESAC ceremony tomorrow, to be able to engage, to be given a voice to speak to Parliament, which our poor friends, the indigenous people, are struggling to get. So we were listened to on the religious discrimination bills. We put in a very strong piece about the voice referendum, and we've engaged quite strongly since we knew it was an issue on visas for monastics with Home Affairs. We've offered informal support on difficult governance issues to both monastic and lay across Australia, on constitutions, on how to deal with the ATO and the ACNC. And for those of you who don't know, come and see me afterwards. There are these lovely things called policy banks in the not-for-profits, where a policy bank stores all the best policies in its sector and is prepared to share them for free with anybody that wants them. So wherever we can, even with the limited resources, we've tried to give the best material we can at short notice. With the FABC, we try to be a unified voice on a number of issues, and yet we're still trying to develop a pragmatic, collaborative role with the FABC that will have impact and relevance. What governments and the agencies and others are often asking to see is evidentiary documents that will advance change requests. So when Home Affairs is here in about an hour, the bizarre Zoom call on Monday started off by them saying, gee, I don't think we really understand Buddhism very well. Are you guys short of monastics in Australia? How many would you want? Well, 100 would be a good start, says I. Perhaps we could work on that, they said. So let's see what happens at 2:30. So what we've offered is here, there are three additional issues to what you saw previously, like we'll still engage with state and federal, we'll still help monastics wherever we can. The three themes that we want to put to you today is the first one we want to work on with your help, people watching online and the like, is we need a consensus between the monastics and lay Buddhism on how we work together, how we combine some of those resources. What is it we should be doing in furthering Buddhism? We know on the monastic point of view, there are many living solitary, and they suffer and they find it hard to get the requisites or fund themselves or keep going. And there are other large monastic communities at the other end of the scale. Each has their own challenges and issues, and we need to understand those lives better and to understand what the needs are going to be over the coming decade. And then lastly, there's some beautiful brothers and sisters in this room whose teachers say to them, do you really want to go and establish a new Dhamma center, or should you be virtual? Should you just concentrate on having a small local location for your living, for the odd teaching, but you should consider going to the virtual teaching centers? So I won't go through too much of the detail here, but these are the conversations that we want to engage with the FABC and with the wider ASA community after today. Because, you know, when we're looking for a consensus, we'd say lay leaders have got more worldly knowledge than monastics, but monastics tend to have more visibility than the lay leaders. Lay leaders need the support of monastics to be credible Buddhist leaders. Monastics need the support of devoted lay people to be effective. So would it be wonderful to create 3 to 5 joint key initiatives starting today that would be the most beneficial in furthering Buddhism over the next 10 years, and to ensure that those initiatives are well-resourced, inclusive and empowered, that male and female monastics are supported, male and female lay supporters and their organizations are supported, much like the Buddha would say, I will not pass away until there's a fourfold assembly. The challenges of the life, I think I've covered that, but some are saying it's difficult to maintain vows and precepts as a sole monastic if they're getting limited support. We need to articulate the needs of the various female and male monastic heritages and monasteries, what is needed in a community setting. We need to assess the assistance and resources that are required to both lives, both solo and community. So the vision here is that the ASA with the FABC will want to be a focal point for tools, for knowledge, and requesting any state or federal grants or investment. And lastly, in the themes, we would have a working party to understand how Dharma centers will have a role and a purpose in future, how each tradition decides on that function and size, because surprise, surprise, there are different models that each of the traditions wants to put in place. And to look for collaboration in local areas where there are multiple monasteries. One of my good brothers, Venerable Hojun Futen, talks about a street in Melbourne where there are 3 monasteries of different traditions on the same street, but they may not necessarily collaborate together. When I went for a walk today, there seems to be a number of monasteries on this street, and it would be great if they were collaborating in a local way and supporting each other, especially in times of need. So we know from our own teachings that there's a recognition and a desire for online teachings and forums, and we may be able to suggest a blueprint for the next 10 years to help people put that together themselves. Some in this room have got leading edge knowledge on that. We thought we had a little bit until we fell over with a voice referendum, but we'll learn from that and keep going. But the vision here is to share best practice and cross-Australia learnings with each other, set up a resource base for building and providing governance on new Dharma centers and monasteries, and also share case studies when somebody's done really great work on virtual learning. Over and above, if we have the time, these possibilities have been discussed between the FABC and the ASA. We need a more combined religious response to climate change. In my initial discussions with Home Affairs, they said, you know, we've never come to you and asked you to help on certain things. So they're trying to build domestic violence prevention initiatives with some key communities like the Thai community and the Sri Lankan community, where if the male is Australian and the female is ethnic, they are finding it difficult to support the ethnic lady because she's fearful of talking to government, and they believe that we may have a role to encourage people. It's safe to come and talk. They will look after that person. They need not be fearful if the male is holding their visa status over their head to say you must stay in this marriage. We developed an oath against harm for monastics some time ago with the Alliance for Buddhist Ethics. That seems to be very relevant. It's more, it becomes more relevant time to time. So we're very keen on the standards and behavior of all monastics in Australia. We want to fund training costs for monastics who are suffering from hardship so that they can go on courses that we can fund. So a good example might be somebody's got an opportunity to do a 12-week chaplaincy course, but they don't have the funds themselves. They could apply to a hardship fund, and the hardship fund would say, look, we can fund 6 weeks of that, you know, on the following basis. And lastly and quickly, insurance policy for all Buddhist organizations. Gawaine and I've talked about that before. We both know very good people in that space that might be able to reduce insurance costs, something that's of benefit to the membership. And we still want to, you'll touch on this in a second, I think you've led the way in Australia in terms of multi-faith initiatives on a number of approaches to government. So if I'll pause there, and we'll come back in the dialogue. What would you like to say on the FABC?
Well, first of all, I'd just like to say thank you to the ASA for inviting me and my colleague Philippa, who is somewhere here. Where's Philippa? Philippa's in the back. If I get anything wrong, she's going to let me know. Thank you for inviting us. It's really good to be able to sit together, put faces to names, and hear about the rather different views that sometimes come from the lay and the Sangha elements in the Buddhist community because of the different experiences you have. So I'll talk just very briefly about us and what we're doing. And I'd say don't get too excited about the things that you've just heard that we might do. There's a long way to go and a lot to talk about. And there are some important differences in our starting points between the two organizations, which could be taken as a weakness, but actually as a strength, because it means that we're not doing the same thing. We can each bring something together. So the first thing is the FABC is a peak body for state and territory Buddhist councils. And there's 2 places for each Buddhist council. And unfortunately, there's only Buddhist councils operating in Western Australia, Victoria, and New South Wales. And there's a group with observer status from South Australia. It's a real difficulty for us because we don't have reach into those other states, and it does limit our strength. And what we focus on is national issues, sharing information and ideas across states and territories. So national issues are things like when legislation comes up about discrimination and a Buddhist voice is needed, and we are one of the Buddhist voices that goes forward, hopefully together with you people. And then we share information about what we're doing about Uluru Statement or whatever it might be, and it's an opportunity to share across the country. We focus on the whole Buddhist community, Sangha and lay, and I would say in addition to that, certainly in New South Wales, our focus is very strongly on Buddhist organizations, some of which are temples and monasteries, some of which are community organizations. And what we want to do is to reach the totality of the Buddhist community to the extent possible. We put forward Buddhist perspectives on wider social issues. Two things there. One is we think that Buddhism has a very important set of values which people should hear and which can contribute. And the second thing is we need to hear a Buddhist voice. There are much stronger Hindu and Muslim and other voices where, because we don't come together, we don't have such a voice. And I think one of the things we want is that we are heard. And a little job we have is we manage the registration of Buddhist marriage celebrants. And our strengths and weaknesses. So we have the strengths that we bring from the work we do at state level. So I come with 7 years experience working in New South Wales. Philippa comes perhaps a little bit, Philippa's been working at state level and is also involved in other interfaith organizations in South Australia. So that strength comes into everything we do. And so we learn from that. We're weak because of the lack of councils in some of the states and territories, and our capacity is very limited. Speaking for myself, 85% of my effort goes into New South Wales, 15% goes national, because New South Wales is where I've got my home ground. And so what we need to do is to find ways of pulling the great stuff that happens in New South Wales and South Australia and Victoria into the national arena so we can all share it. So we're going to maintain our work with marriage celebrants, which is very small. Strengthening recognition by government and national interfaith groups is really, really critical. One of the things we're going to do shortly after this meeting is send out a joint letter with the new committee that you have, letting interfaith organizations know who the key Buddhist organizations are and that we're working together. In New South Wales, we're part of a state advisory council to government, and there are moves to try and do something similar at national level. Relevant social issues I've talked about, and responding to issues raised in the Buddhist community. People come to us with all kinds of things, and we do what we can. Sometimes we're helpful, sometimes not. And one of those, of course, is problems in accessing visas. Is that it?
Yep.
There you go. Well, I've got one more thing to say, I think. When I think of how we work together, we each recognize that each organization has strengths and weaknesses, and that what we need is a structure that we can work through, which doesn't load us down. So if we know that we're collaborating formally and informally, if we know that we can take an issue to you and say, have you got any suggestions on this? Will you support it? And you can do that to us, no matter what the issue. And we've got a simple way of doing that. If we can come together when there is a parliamentary inquiry and share our ideas and perhaps put in a joint submission and maybe appear together at a parliamentary committee.
Which we've done.
Which we've done. And if we can share what we're doing around some of the big issues, like, for example, the Uluru Statement, which we are currently doing, then we're onto a good thing. It will become difficult if we put too much weight on it too soon. And if we forget that your focus is quite rightly focused on the Sangha and working out, and ours is focused on the Buddhist community working in. So there's a little bit of difference there. Back to you.
So this was a section that we really wanted to open up to dialogue, that certainly there's been a lot of work gone in on both committees to say, doesn't it make sense to collaborate? But I think we're both somewhat research-minded, and that would be true of the committees, saying there's probably only two or three things that we could do really well. So what does the membership want us to work on over the next 2, 3, 5 years, and possibly through that time, set out a plan for 10 years? So this part now is to hear from you, and we pass the microphone around and say, what is it that the ASA and the FABC should be doing? What would increase the membership? What would make both organizations a lot stronger in Australia?
And if I can just add one thing, I'm always conscious that from the FABC, we look in and we look out. Looking in is to support the Buddhist communities in their many forms. Looking out is to see what Buddhism can offer to the wider community. And if we can keep a balance between those, we'll be doing very well.
Yep. We hear from you.
I'm not sure that this is directly relevant, but I would like to make some contact with the First Nations people and share, because they are also quite spiritual, and to establish that kind of connection quite strongly, to share between Buddhist teachings and their way of life, and making real connection with them. Coming from the nuns community, I would also like to especially engage with the elder women. So is there a support or a way that we can do something?
So because both organizations of late has tried to give support both to the Uluru Statement and the Yes campaign for the Voice referendum, is that something that the nuns would be prepared to participate on more? So one of our issues, sadly, that was the 11th Aboriginal elder we'd asked this morning to present. We'd found it really difficult for an Aboriginal elder to want to come out and talk to us. We don't know why. We want to show respect to that. But if you and the nuns wanted to participate and sort of make that happen, is that something that you could take on?
Possibly, but I was more focused on like teachings and spirituality.
Can I just make a comment that two things about working with Indigenous communities this year. One is that everybody who is able to be out there working for the referendum is doing it. So they're incredibly busy and very, very difficult to find. And I would think that's probably the reason why you found it hard to get someone. The other thing is, I think it's really important that we don't say we focus on Indigenous issues this year and then we forget about it. What we should be doing is creating the foundations for ongoing relationships with our local Indigenous communities. And I know that a lot of monasteries and community groups do that very well. If it's not a thing you've done, you might consider this year as an opportunity to engage with local Aboriginal land councils or whatever the group is.
Thank you for the question. Sorry, very much. Okay, yeah.
It's not a further question, it's a further response. So, in my experience of working with Indigenous communities, it's a matter of, like with everybody else, relationship building. And so on the ground, relationship building, as Gawaine said, those who are involved in the Voice referendum or the Yes campaign are very, very busy talking to many, many groups around the country, and that's their role. And so what I have found, and this has been through many years of engaging with Indigenous people for sitting on country and learning their, having the opportunity to learn about their traditional meditation methods, the Davies circle, has been through building relationships such that, like, now we have a group, very small, but out of the Hayagriva Buddhist Center, with an elder who actually approached us about this. He happens to be a Zen Buddhist, and his wife comes to our center, and so we do a regular sit on country over there, and also, you know, of course, we got a lot of plans together, but it's been a relationship building, and so it's really, you know, finding who's there in your local community and who within that community that you feel connection with, because there's a lot of knowledge to share. And, you know, it's a very, very deep spirituality, as is Buddhism. And I think we've got a lot to be able to share there. There's a lot in common. So I'm happy to talk further on that.
Thank you. That's wonderful. Ajahn Brahm, please.
One of the problems which I have faced over many years when you do get to know senior government ministers is they do not know who to talk to about Buddhist issues. It has to be somebody who is not just one particular tradition, who can give an overview of how, you know, Buddhists feel about certain issues. There's no Dr. Jeff Gallup, you know, was very friendly with me. He would always say that that's one of the problems with Buddhism. We've got big in numbers, but we're vanishing. We just don't appear anywhere. So what I would like to see is the FAB and the the FABC and the ASA at least to tell the government, you know, we are here. This is the number, the email to call, and you'll get a response. At least somebody who has enough knowledge, they can actually say, we'll call this person, email that person. And that means our government knows who the Buddhists really are. Many years ago, there were some people who put themselves up as not the FABC, but the FBAC or something, the Federation, or Buddhist Federation of Australia, the BFA. And that caused me a lot of concern because it wasn't representative. It had no democracy. And eventually it fell apart after many, many, many years. And now, recently we had, was it the Federation of, no, the Buddhist Society of Australia, which is totally false. But if somebody in the government want to contact Buddhists, who the heck do they call? We are kind of invisible to government, and that's what government needs. That's what they're asking for. Buddhist message, you know, something to do with Buddhism. Who can we get on board? And it has to be somebody who doesn't speak for their own tradition, who has enough knowledge about the different Buddhist traditions and can represent each one of them as best they possibly can.
Can I ask a supplementary? Do you think, therefore, we need to lift our game nationally and across each state? So if there are gaps in Queensland and they're like, we need to try and find people who would participate and speak.
It'd be wonderful if you could do that. These are
well, I think we can.
These are just dreams.
Yeah.
So maybe in Queensland, the Queensland Sangha Association, which is also a confusing name, but they are very active in chaplaincy amongst all the traditions, so that if they had members that would be willing to like restart the Buddhist Council in Queensland. I know when I was in Queensland, I got in touch with the Buddhist Council of Queensland. I actually did get a response. Didn't tell me anything, and it was just like, oh, glad you're here. But nothing was happening. Of course, as you well know, nothing had been happening in Queensland for an awfully long time. But QSA came to mind because they're already quite connected within the Buddhist community across the traditions, so that they may know of potential people, if not amongst themselves. I also think that this is an issue, as you're asking Venerable Mettaji, you asked if we need to lift our game, absolutely. That I think it's also like just from engagements around the voice with, people saying, oh, we're reaching out to faith organisations, but we haven't heard from them because they don't know who to contact either. And so we need to be able to, really promote ourselves, I think, in the broader community in such a way people know who to contact.
I think we need to lift our game in being able to contact each other, actually. I think it is actually very difficult to make contact in the modern world where, a lot of the organisations don't give phone numbers, and, they have a thing on the net where you write what you want and then wait and receive a reply or not. And government's not going to.
Could you give an example, Venerable, please?
Sorry?
Of those examples, could you give an example?
Well, think about, the Queensland, as far as I can see, I went looking the other day, Queensland, no, I know the Sangha Association, the council, and as far as I can see from their website, they haven't operated for years. It's a very old, and I think, our own resources are so limited. It's, how much more, I think to streamline them, to be able to use them more effectively would help. But, we're really stretched because we're not getting new blood in to support, it's the same old. So I think, really making a decision to try and work on one area and get as maximum that we can from that, rather than trying to spread ourselves even thinner.
Can we hear from others in the room? So I'll ask you in a second, what are the 3 things that we should take away to discuss and perhaps work on together? Venerables over here.
Can I just raise something which has come up talking about Queensland? The reality is that a lot of the things that we need to deal with are state issues, not national issues. If you want to do education in schools, if you want to do chaplaincy, if you want to register an organisation, whole pay rates, whole lot of things, it's at the state level. And that's where we have an advantage in that we are built on state organisations, and it's great that there is a Queensland branch of the ASA. But I think one of the difficulties of operating in Australia is that you do need to be able to work at both levels. And it is difficult for a national organisation that doesn't, as it were, touch the ground in a state to have a presence there.
So, put a different way then, are you happy that we pursue these directions that we put to you today? We want it to be a conversation starter, but we need to come out and get your support to clearly understand what those issues are, which could vary state to national, as we say. And I think it will be slowly. So I think there's a recognition, it's unspoken in the room, that we're short on resources, that bringing new people into the organizations, but there isn't any reason why we shouldn't promote it. We've had a number of examples, someone saying, well, I'd love to help you, but I didn't know what you wanted. So it's almost like you're missing each other, that somebody wants to offer and give philanthropy and they don't know where to put it. And the other one says, I've got needs right now, I could do with help, promoting this new retreat center, or, from the very basic tasks all the way through to, can you help write a statement that we're going to send to a joint select committee, for example?
Can I have a slightly different perspective? And that is, what we're doing now is the most important thing, is we're building relationships. Without that, nothing happens. With that, all kinds of things happen that don't look big, but actually do make a difference. Someone in the room knows someone who knows what I need. And that's how I get it. And it was 2 phone calls and people caught up with an old friend. Great stuff. So if we focus on getting our working together, working really well, and letting other people know about it, and take perhaps, we've started working around, there's 2 things we're currently working around. One is visas, and the other is the Uluru Statement. And if we were to take that as a really good starting point, recognizing that we will open the doors to other things when we're ready, but we may learn more about what's really needed as we go, rather than trying to sign up too much up front. So I love the idea of having a menu and hearing what's valuable. But from our point of view, I think if we could consolidate on visas and the work around the Uluru Statement, and really practice quick responses from each other, because we're doing well, but we're still not doing well enough. We promised to get a joint letter out several months ago, and we still haven't. So that's our
because one of the biggest problems that the temples are having is that they, there isn't the monastics to manage and to work with the people, and that that affects both the communities as well as the monastic communities. And I'm hoping we have some good news. I think you're presenting on it later, Venerable Mettaji, but I think that that's a really important thing that we need to concentrate on with the new government in power.
Can you hear me? Yeah. What I would like to see then, as you've been talking, is can we share a web page of information so as that web page is the same FABC and ASA? So as we begin gathering or collating our material, our names, our contacts, maybe some of that isn't for public view, but for at least maybe even committee members, that we have that information instantaneously and it's updated regularly, so that we know in this date we can contact this person because we're both working together from the same page online.
Yep, wonderful. Hitchhiking on something you said, I would add in a third, that sometimes we have to be fleet-footed, that we only get a short period of time to make a submission.
Yeah.
And it's interesting now, having done it a number of times, like jointly we gave a presentation one day to a Senate inquiry on religious discrimination bills. And we both thought it was the first time that we've been asked or given an opportunity to talk to government in almost like a decade. Recently on the voice referendum, those who were advocating for the multi-faith organizations to get together were dragging their heels a bit and said, well, we think we would want to learn more about the voice referendum, but I'll have to talk to my hierarchy in my religion. And we said to them, well, we can give you a decision in 10 minutes because it's 3 phone calls. And they said, why isn't everybody as easy to work with as the Buddhists? I said, well, remember that. So when that process got stuck, we said, wouldn't it be great to send an open letter to all federal parliamentarians saying we think this is a moral imperative and yes? And we helped them draft it. And from the moment that it was conceptualized with all of the, some of the religions saying it's going to take 2 or 3 months to get a decision, we got it signed off by all the religions in 11 days. And then the day it arrived, the Prime Minister said, this came without any fanfare, and I haven't seen multi-faith organizations come together so quickly, on one issue. So there's a flip side to this, is when the spontaneous opportunity arises, we have to work quickly, we have to get the authority from the committees. So I'd say we'll continue to do that because now I think we built currency with state and federal. Would you say something about the multicultural advisory group that's been established? Because that's new for Australia, I'd say.
So very briefly, in New South Wales, under the extraordinary leadership of someone who ran an organisation about religious education in schools, who's a Presbyterian. He is a political genius and he is incredibly open and even-handed. He masterminded a process which brought together all the major faith groups where we agreed the rules about how we'd work together. He sold it to government and government set up the New South Wales Faith Communities Advisory Council, which I'm on representing Buddhism, which is going to be continued in a slightly different form by the new government. And it's a one-stop shop where government can come to the faith communities and say, what about this, 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 this? And we can take things to government without having to run around and get everybody on board and get all the permissions.
So tell me again, how much funding did they give you? How much did the advisory council get?
None. And there is a move which is being spearheaded on behalf of others by the Muslims to reproduce this at national level, which would be very interesting.
So what I take from that is I think government wants to engage more. They're looking for focal points. They want to hear from us. They want to hear from people who have authority, who can speak and has the unified voice. So they come with some authority. It's been talked through, even if it happens to be fairly quickly, and say, what's the Buddhist position on, what was a new one of late? So religious ideology, the swastika and concerns, for a number of faiths, whether that's right. But you get 2 weeks to put in a submission. They don't say, oh, you get 3 months, write a paper, come back to us, join a committee.
And the other thing which comes out of this is the faith groups help each other. So there were some, a Hindu temple was defaced by, probably by some Sikhs who were kind of freeloading in Sydney. The Hindu Council wrote to us all, and they had letters of support from 10 groups within 2 days, which they could then take to their community saying, we're not alone. Now that's really good, I think. And I was able to take Muslims and Hindus down to Nantian Institute to learn how faith-based higher education is organized in Australia, because they want to do it and we've done it.
I think it'd be good if we could all kind of have a central point where we can register those sorts of things we're doing. Because people will contact me, they'll contact Qigong Sunim, they'll contact the Buddhist Council, they'll contact ASA, and we don't know each other's in that space. I mean, the Jewish situation is prime example, where the Jewish community in Melbourne actually contacted me in Sydney. And there were other people engaged in all that. But I think we need somehow just to be able to register somewhere, look, I've had this conversation, so we know who's speaking in the space and we can coordinate that effort.
So the message I take from today is we need to tighten that up first, just as you said, make it have strong foundations, find points of contact across Australia, make sure the lines of communication are really good, that egos are parked and we can get responses out fairly quickly. We can build better relationships with government, with sort of many agencies. You're the membership. Is that what you want us both to do? That might be a great place to finish today, and we'll carry on with this work. And it was a conversation starter, so we want to generate initiatives after this and then ask for people's support, or even try and bring in new membership that would say, I'd be very happy to work on that one issue for you for 12 months, that we go and find good resource to make it happen. And then it would have been a good conference. Thank you.
Thank you very much.